we just need to create a new component. Okay, here we have the sales info job manager. Now we need to create, for example, sales info job worker, okay, because it's worker time. So now we have here our class. Now let's provide a profile, because as always we need to segregate, we need to separate the worker from the manager. So now let's use the Spring Batch and Spring Batch integration annotations. We set the configuration, and now we set also the requires constructor from Lombok. So now that we have all our annotations here for our worker, let's start using our components here, or our bins. So for the worker side, we need to use the remote chunking worker builder, this one here. Okay, let's just call it by remote chunk worker. So I'm injecting, and we also need to provide a Kafka template. So let's go here, let's put it here. So now that we have here, the Kafka template, we need to start, for example, building the let's call it by our inbound channel, okay, because the manager will send chunk requests to Kafka, and the worker will receive the chunk requests from Kafka. So in that order, we need once again to create some bins. I will just copy here, for example. Let's copy the current channel, okay, and as we are for this case consuming, okay, we are consuming from Kafka, we need also to do the same, just as we did here in manager. Let's do in the worker side, okay. So we are just going to copy this here. Okay, so we need to change the topic, because we are consuming, we are in the worker side, so we will consume what the manager is providing to us. Okay, so we are going to consume the chunk requests. So let's change it here, let's put it here. All right, and yeah, now that we have the inbound channel, okay, this is the way that we consume from Kafka. Now we need also a chunk, not chunk, but we need also an outbound channel. So let's just copy what we did here and paste it here, and also we need the outbound one. Okay, because we just need to make it very fast. So as we can see, now we will consume, okay, from Kafka sales request, okay, and we will we will send to Kafka sales replies, okay, or response. Let's just see the way that we did here. Okay, it's replies. So let's paste it here. We just can see, okay, this is the worker. The worker will, in our case, consume from Kafka and produce also. So the next thing that we need to do here now is just a way to create, for example, our integration flow. Okay, so in that order, let's just create here, for example, integration flow. Let's sales worker. Okay, let's call it by step because it's a step, and let's just use our remote chunking worker builder, having an input channel. As always, we will have also output channel, and in our case now this is the place that we need to understand or review once again the concept. So if we take a look here, let's go back a little bit here, and if we take a look here, we can see that our worker will have a chunk processor, which is optional, and a chunk item writer. Okay, it's item processor and item writer. So let's implement it. Let's do that. So for example here, item processor. For now, let's just make it very simple, okay? Because I know that we are receiving sales info, okay? But we need to specify here. Because we cannot leave it with raw values. So sales info DTO, right? And yeah, so I know that we are receiving sales info DTO. Maybe let's just for now log it into our console. So let me use the Sales4j Lombok, okay, in order to log this. Let's use it like this. So let's call it by item processing, and let's put here our sales info. We are just logging it, okay? So then we need to return the sales info, because if you understand the concept, okay, it receives an input and return an output. So just take a look on our previous examples and you will understand what we are talking about. So in this case, we are just leaving it here, but you could just create another component, okay, for your item processor, which will be very easy for you to test, to debug, and also. So, but for now, let's just create now the item writer. So let's just try to understand it by, for example, printing the items. So I know that it's receiving. Let's use lambda expression, and yeah, I don't need it. So let's log item writing, okay, and let's print the items. So, and build. So this is a very simple way, okay, to create, but of course we need to put here our inbound channels and outbound channel. Yes, that's pretty good. Let's format the code and let's set it as a bin. Yes, I think everything is okay for now. So now that we have our worker, let's see what we did. So we create a new component, okay, sales info worker, and we specify a new profile, because the manager should have a profile manager. The worker has another profile. So for you guys, you could just, for example, create two different Spring Batch applications in order to avoid this kind of setting profiles. But let's use a good functionality that Spring Batch not Spring Batch. Let's use the good functionality that Spring Team and Spring Boot create for us. So first thing, just we cannot forget about this, because we need also to create some stuffs here before running our application. We need to create here application property, okay, profile for our worker. But before that, we need also to create the serialization and deserialization classes. Just as we did here for manager, we will need to create this formal serialization and deserialization classes. So in that order, Let's create here, for example, we have chunk request, chunk response, right? Serializer and the serializer. So now let's create chunk request deserializer, because our worker need to deserialize this type of chunk request. Okay, so let's go here and let's create. So this is the way that we can just repeat, okay, the same code as we did in the manager. Okay, let's the serializer, it should be this one, Kafka. Okay, and we are deserializing chunk request from Spring. Let's implement the method deserialize. Let's just return here, for example, serialization utils that deserialize, and let's deserialize the chunk request. So we need to cast it. This is the way that we create the chunk request deserialize, because our worker will receive the chunk request, so it needs to deserialize. And as we did here, the chunk response deserialization, we need to serialize now chunk response. The manager is deserializing, will use the serialization in order to deserialize it, but someone needs to serialize the chunk response, who in our case will be the worker. Okay, so chunk response serializer, implement serializer. So it's implement serializer. So we are serializing the chunk response from Spring Batch. Okay, pay attention. It should be from Spring Batch. And here let's just do the same. Let's implement the methods. Let's just use serialization utils from Spring Boot. Okay, and we need to serialize the chunk response. Okay, very easy for now. Let's just keep it like that. Yeah, so now here in our worker, okay, we as you can see, I just copy all the values that I had here in our manager, and I paste it here. Of course, the consumer group for our worker will be worker, for example, worker group, but group is redundant. Okay, so let's just put here. Okay, so our worker will produce, okay, the key and the value. It's not chunk request, but it will produce the chunk response. Okay, serializer. So here the value is the same when it consumes, and it consumes the chunk request, and it needs to deserialize the chunk request. Okay, so it will use the chunk request, in our case the serializer, okay, in order to process, okay, the chunk requests. So this is what we have done here. So for now, let's run our application. Don't forget that we have here, okay, we have here the profiles. So we need to run our manager and our workers in different profiles. So first thing, let's run our manager first. Okay, let's just check if the profile is manager. So let's run the manager. And let me just check one thing. Okay, for now, let's just set the manager to run on a specific port, and the worker will run on this was the worker. Okay, so let's set the manager too. Okay, let's set the manager. So the manager will run on this port. Okay, so now, okay, rerun the manager. As we can see, waiting for one result. Okay, because the manager has sent chunk requests. If we take a look here, the browser, we will see that now we have here data. Okay, it was the first time that I ran, so let me just restart it. Now let me clean the topic. Okay, so let me clean the topic. All right, now we don't have any data. That's good. And now let's run the manager. Let's check the topic here. Yes, we have one register here. So now let's run the worker. Okay, so in order to run the worker, we'll run it here on my terminal. Okay, so let's just put here worker. So this is the way that I'm running the worker now. So let's fire the worker. Yes, and let's check what we have here. The topics. So the worker is up, but it's not consuming the data. Okay, it's not consuming. So let's check, let's see what we have here. Worker. Okay, the topic. Okay, the worker will consume. Okay, inbound chunk requests. Okay, and will produce chunk replies. Let's see here. Yeah, will produce chunk replies. Let's run once again the manager. The worker is here. Okay, the worker is here, is up. Okay, it was working. So as we can see, yeah, it's working now. So as we can see here, the worker is receiving, okay, the data from Kafka, and the manager is sending the data into Kafka. So resuming, guys, let's go back, okay, here. Let me show the presentation. So what we have here is very simple. Okay, we have manager sending requests. Okay, the worker is consuming the incoming requests, processing, as we can see here, the worker side, it's processing the requests, writing the request. In this case, we are just printing, okay, and then it's sending the replies, right? And the manager is consuming the replies. So this is what we have here. Let me check. Okay, this is the worker. So when the worker receives, when the manager, let's check here, the manager sends data. Okay, it sends the job ID, it sends the sequence, sends the step contribution. Okay, and in other hand, the worker will consume, okay, the chunk requests, will process the data, So while sending, let me just show you guys here, while sending the response, okay, it will send, for example, the step contribution, how many data the worker has read, written, filtered, skipped, and so on. Okay, that's the meaning of the step contribution. Okay, so guys, we don't actually, this tutorial is becoming so long. Okay, and we don't want to persist it, because we want to show you guys how to implement remote chunking. Okay, so as we can see, the data is here. We are sending and receiving data. We are sending data from Kafka, okay, and receiving the data, okay, from Kafka. And if you take a look here, okay, we are running both components with different profiles. So this is the worker, and if we go back here in the manager, we will see that we run it as a manager. So if you take a look here, one thing that you have to understand if you are following our tutorials is that we have the job repository. Okay, that's why we have here the database and the schema also. So if you check, for example, here in the step execution, let me just show you guys. Okay, you check the step execution. Okay, maybe it needs a limit. Let's suppose 10. Okay, let's run. Yeah, if you check the step execution, you will see, okay, that we are processing, okay, the data. So this is very simple example. Okay, of course you don't have to follow, for example, here our scheduler. We are running always, that's why it's just to show you guys. Okay, but this is remote chunking. This is remote chunking. You have manager, you have worker. Okay, the manager has only the reader. Okay, the item reader in our case was a let's call it by flat file item reader. Okay, and it sends messages into Kafka and receives from Kafka in order to coordinate the chunks. Okay, how many contribution every step worker has done. So for example here, one thing that you have to keep in mind is the fact that in our case we are working only with one partition. For those who understand the Kafka, they know that we have for Kafka the question of scalability. So in order to scale your Kafka, you need to add more partitions. Okay, so we are running an application. Okay, we have here our topics, and our topics, both of them, they just have one partition. So in a real case scenario, you will need to add more partitions in order to scale more your workers. As we have here, for example, you need to scale your workers, so you will have more power and you will process faster and so on. Okay, guys. So any doubt, any suggestion, please give me an hint, and don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, put some likes, because I think that this is topic. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye bye.